March 12, 1945, 14:37 hours, 23,000 feet over the Ruhr Valley, Germany. Captain James "Jim" Malone, 27 years old, from Dallas, Texas, was flying a North American P-51D Mustang, serial number 44148574, nicknamed Texas Ranger. The Mustang, the aircraft that changed the war, long-range escort fighter, single seat, single engine, the Rolls-Royce Merlin V1657 engine producing 1,490 horsepower, top speed 437 miles per hour, range 1,650 miles with drop tanks, 650 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, the aircraft that could escort B-17 bombers all the way to Berlin and back. But right now, Jim's Mustang had a problem. A serious problem that started 3 days ago with what seemed like a simple fix. 3 days earlier, March 9th, the ground crew at RAF Debden noticed the propeller wasn't tracking correctly. Tracking means all three blades follow the same path when spinning. If one blade is slightly bent or misaligned, it creates vibration. Small vibration at first, but at 2,700 RPM, small vibration becomes big problem. Staff Sergeant Mike Patterson, crew chief, 32 years old, former Ford mechanic from Detroit, examined the propeller. He found the issue. One blade, the bottom blade, had taken a small hit from ground debris during the previous landing. A stone kicked up by the landing gear, just a tiny ding, 1/4 inch deep, 2 inches long, nothing serious. Normally they'd replace the entire propeller, but replacement propellers were in short supply. The logistics chain was stretched. Parts were being prioritized for bombers. Fighters had to make do. Mike made a decision. He'd file down the ding, rebalance the blade, and put it back in service. He spent 4 hours on it, carefully filing the damaged area, using a micrometer to measure blade thickness at multiple points. Ensuring all three blades had exactly the same weight distribution, he balanced it on a knife-edge balancing stand. Perfect. All three blades hung level. No vibration should occur. But Mike made one small mistake, one tiny error that he didn't know about because the training manual didn't cover it adequately. When you file down a propeller blade, you're removing metal. That metal removal changes the blade's resonant frequency, the frequency at which it naturally vibrates. And if that frequency matches the engine's firing frequency at certain RPM ranges, you get harmonic resonance, amplification, vibration that builds and builds. Mike didn't know this. The manual didn't explain it. He'd fixed dozens of propeller dings the same way. Never had a problem before. March 12th, mission briefing. Escort B-17s to a synthetic oil refinery near Gelsenkirchen, 400 miles into Germany. Deep penetration. 8 P-51s from the 4th Fighter Group. Jim Malone flying as flight leader. Takeoff at 13:15. Climb to altitude. Form up with the bomber stream. Everything normal. Engine gauges reading perfect. Manifold pressure 51 inches. RPM 2,700. Oil temperature 85 degrees Celsius. Coolant temperature 110 degrees. All within specifications. At 14:30 they crossed into German airspace over the Rhine River. The bomber stream stretched for miles ahead. 72 B-17 flying fortresses flying in tight combat box formations, each box designed for mutual defensive fire. The P-51s weaved above and around them, scanning for German fighters. That's when Jim felt it, a slight vibration through the control stick, barely noticeable at first, like a phone buzzing in your pocket, a frequency around 20 hertz, fast enough to feel but not fast enough to hear. He checked the gauges, everything still reading normal. Manifold pressure 51 inches, RPM 2,700, oil temperature 85 degrees Celsius, coolant temperature 110 degrees, oil pressure 75 pounds per square inch, fuel flow 90 gallons per hour, every needle exactly where it should be. He thought maybe it was just rough air. Turbulence from the bomber stream. Wake turbulence from 72 four-engine bombers creates a lot of disturbed air. The P-51s often felt vibration when flying close to the formation, but the vibration didn't go away. It grew, slowly, steadily. By 14:32, 2 minutes later, it was strong enough that his hand on the stick was shaking visibly. He could see his gloved fingers trembling. The frequency had increased, maybe 25 hertz now, and the amplitude was building. What started as a gentle buzz was becoming a harsh shake. By 14:35, 5 minutes into German airspace, the entire airframe was vibrating. He could see the wingtips blurring slightly from the oscillation. The gun sight was jumping. The instrument panel was shaking so hard the needles were difficult to read. His body was being jolted in the seat. His vision was starting to blur from the vibration transmitted through the airframe to the seat, to his body, to his eyes. This wasn't normal. This was mechanical failure. Something was resonating. Something was feeding back on itself. Harmonic amplification. When a vibration frequency matches a natural resonant frequency of a structure, the vibration amplifies, doubles, triples, keeps building until something breaks. Then, at 14:37, 7 minutes after entering German airspace, the sound changed. It happened suddenly. One moment the engine was producing its normal sound, the characteristic deep-throated roar of the Merlin V-1657, 12 cylinders arranged in a 60-degree V configuration, each cylinder firing in precise sequence. Thousands of controlled explosions per minute, creating smooth rotational power. Then the sound became something else. A grinding metallic screech that Jim could hear even through his leather-flying helmet and the ambient engine noise. It was the sound of metal on metal, steel grinding against steel, the sound of something failing, something critical, something that, if it failed completely, would turn this aircraft from a controlled flying machine into a ballistic object subject only to gravity and momentum. The engine's front bearing, the bearing that supports the propeller shaft. The vibration from the improperly balanced propeller had been hammering on that bearing for 30 minutes. The bearing housing was cracking. The steel was fatiguing under the cyclic stress. Metal fatigue happens fast when you have resonance, thousands of stress cycles per minute. The molecular structure of the metal starts to fail. At 14:38, the bearing housing cracked completely. Not a catastrophic explosion, just a crack, but enough that the propeller shaft was no longer properly supported. It began to wobble. The propeller, spinning at 2,700 RPM, started to precess, to gyrate. Like a loose wheel on a car, Jim felt the controls go wrong immediately. The stick started bucking in his hand, hard. Violent jolts that nearly broke his grip. The rudder pedals were kicking. The aircraft wanted to yaw left, then right, then left again. The nose was bobbing up and down. He keyed the radio. "Red flight, this is Red Leader. I've got serious engine trouble, prop shaft failure, losing control authority." "Red Leader, can you make it back?" That was Lieutenant Tommy Bradford, his wingman. "Negative. If this prop comes off, it'll slice through the cockpit or rip the engine mount off. Either way, I'm dead." Jim had maybe 2 minutes before structural failure. The wobbling propeller was creating massive stress on the engine mounts. The mounts were 6 steel brackets bolted to the firewall, designed to handle engine torque, not designed to handle asymmetric gyroscopic forces from a wobbling propeller. He had 3 options, all bad. Option 1, bail out. Abandon the aircraft, parachute into Germany, become a prisoner of war, spend the rest of the war in Stalag Luft. If the Germans didn't shoot him on the way down. Option 2, try to nurse the aircraft back to England, 150 miles, through German airspace, with flak and fighters, and an engine that could disintegrate at any second. Option 3, attempt an emergency landing in Germany, in enemy territory, guaranteed capture, probably interrogation, possibly execution if they decided he was a terror bomber. Jim chose option 2, not because it was the best option, but because it was the only option that gave him any chance of getting home. But there was a problem. He couldn't control the aircraft normally. The vibration was too severe. When he tried to bank right, the aircraft rolled, but the nose wouldn't follow. The wobbling propeller was creating so much yaw instability that coordinated flight was impossible. He tried reducing power, pulled the throttle back to 30 inches manifold pressure, reduced RPM to 2,000. The vibration decreased slightly, but not enough. The bearing was already damaged. Any rotation at all was making it worse. Then Jim remembered something from advanced flight school, something the old instructor, Major Bill Hendricks, had said. A Korean war vet who'd flown F-86 Sabres. If you ever lose primary flight controls, remember you still have power and you still have rudder. You can fly any aircraft with just those two things. Not well, but you can fly it. Jim made a decision. He'd shut down the engine completely. Pull mixture to idle cutoff. Stop the propeller from spinning. Eliminate the vibration. Then glide. But there was a problem with that too. A P-51D in a power-off glide has a glide ratio of about 8:1. From 23,000 feet, that gave him a glide distance of about 35 miles. He was 150 miles from England. He'd never make it, unless he could restart the engine, use it in bursts, short power applications to extend the glide, then shut it down again before the vibration destroyed the airframe. It was insane. Restarting a hot engine in flight was dangerous. The Merlin's starter motor wasn't designed for repeated use. It could burn out, or the engine could fail to restart and he'd be left with a dead aircraft. But it was the only chance. Jim pulled the mixture control to idle cutoff. The engine coughed, sputtered, died. The propeller windmilled for a few seconds, then stopped. Locked position. The sudden silence was deafening. The vibration stopped, completely. The aircraft felt stable again. But now he was in a glide, descending. Airspeed 180 miles per hour, rate of descent 1,200 feet per minute. He trimmed the aircraft for best glide speed, pushed the nose down slightly. 160 miles per hour, that would give him maximum distance. He called the flight. Red flight, I'm in a dead stick glide. Heading 270, altitude descending through 22,000. I'm going to try controlled engine restarts to extend range. Red leader, that's crazy. The manual says, forget the manual. I'm not dying in Germany. Jim glided for 5 minutes, descended to 17,000 feet, gained about 8 miles distance. Then he prepared for restart. He pushed the mixture back to full rich, checked magnetos on, battery on, fuel pressure good, said a prayer, hit the starter. The Merlin cranked. Once, twice, caught, coughed, roared to life, but Jim kept power low, only 20 inches manifold pressure, just enough to maintain altitude, RPM at 1,800, below the resonance frequency. The vibration came back, but less severe at lower RPM. Manageable? The aircraft shook but didn't buck. He ran the engine for 2 minutes, gained back 3,000 feet of altitude, then shut it down again. Mixture to cutoff. Silence. Glide again. This became his pattern. Glide for 5 minutes. Restart. Climb for 2 minutes. Shut down. Repeat. Each cycle bought him 15 to 20 miles of distance, but each restart was harder than the last. The starter motor was getting hot. On the 4th restart, it took 6 seconds of cranking before the engine caught. The starter was failing, and the bearing was getting worse. Each time he ran the engine, even at low power, the damaged bearing degraded further. By the 6th restart, he could feel metal grinding, could hear it over the engine roar. The propeller shaft was wobbling even at 1,800 RPM. At 15:42, 1 hour and 5 minutes after the failure started, Jim crossed into Allied airspace. Belgium, still 80 miles from England, altitude 9,000 feet. On his 8th restart attempt, he hit the starter. The motor cranked, weak, slow. The battery was dying. The engine turned over, once, twice, 3 times, not catching, 4 times, 5. The starter motor was screaming, overheating, smoke coming from under the cowling, 6 times, 7. Finally, on the 8th compression stroke, the engine fired, caught, ran rough, very rough, but ran. Jim added power, 25 inches. The vibration was severe now, the entire aircraft shaking like it was coming apart. But he needed altitude, needed every foot he could get. The engine ran for 90 seconds, then made a sound Jim had never heard before, A bang, not an explosion, a sharp metallic crack. Something broke. The propeller separated, not the blades. The entire propeller hub. The bearing housing had finally failed completely. The propeller, all three blades still attached to the hub, departed the aircraft, flew forward, tumbled, disappeared into the clouds ahead. The sudden loss of weight and drag made the nose pitch up violently. Jim was thrown against the straps. His head hit the canopy frame. Stars, disorientation. He recovered, pushed the stick forward, got the nose down. But now he had a new problem. Without the propeller, the engine was overspeeding. The crankshaft was spinning freely, no load. The RPM gauge was redlined. 3,500, 3,700, 4,000, far beyond design limits. He pulled the mixture to cutoff, but it was too late. The engine seized. Metal-on-metal contact. The pistons welded themselves to the cylinder walls. The crankshaft stopped, violently. The entire engine mount flexed. One of the 6 mount brackets sheared off. The engine sagged forward in the mounts. Now Jim had a dead engine that was barely attached to the aircraft, and he was 60 miles from England, altitude 10,000 feet, in a powerless glide. He did the math. Glide ratio 8-to-1. 10,000 feet equals 80,000 feet of forward travel, equals about 15 miles. He was 45 miles short, unless he could find thermals, rising air currents, columns of warm air rising from the ground. Sailplane pilots used them to stay aloft for hours without engines. Jim had read about it, had even watched glider pilots at an air show before the war. But he'd never tried it himself, never needed to. The P-51 always had power, until now. He started looking for thermals, signs of rising air. In sailplane training, pilots learned to read the sky. Cumulus clouds indicate thermals beneath them. The flat-bottom clouds form at the top of rising air columns where moisture condenses at the dew point. Dark patches on the ground, sunlit fields, towns with black asphalt all create thermals by heating air at the surface. Jim spotted a cumulus cloud ahead, maybe 3 miles away, altitude of the cloud base around 6,000 feet. He turned toward it, adjusted his glide to arrive at the cloud base with enough altitude to search for the thermal core. As he approached, he felt it. The variometer, a sensitive vertical speed indicator, started showing positive rate of climb, 50 feet per minute up. Not from engine power, from rising air. He'd found the edge of the thermal. He circled, gently. A P-51 isn't designed for thermal soaring. It's a high-performance fighter with a wing loading of 39 pounds per square foot. Sailplanes have wing loadings of 5 to 8 pounds per square foot. They float. The P-51 falls like a rock by comparison, but any aircraft can thermal if the rising air is strong enough. Jim tightened his turn, banking 30 degrees. Circling in the thermal, the variometer climbed, 100 feet per minute up, 200, 300. He'd found the core, the center of the thermal where the rising air was strongest. He held the bank angle, kept the circle tight, stayed in the core. For 5 minutes, he circled, gained 2,000 feet of altitude. The thermal weakened at 8,000 feet, the top. He leveled the wings, set course for England, began the glide again. He calculated, 8,000 feet altitude, glide ratio 8-to-1, equals 64,000 feet forward travel, equals 12 miles. He'd gained 12 miles from one thermal. He needed 3 more like that to reach England. He found another thermal 15 minutes later. This one was weaker, only 150 feet per minute, but he worked it, circled for 7 minutes, gained 1,000 feet, every foot counted. Then he glided again, scanning ahead for the next thermal, looking for clouds, looking for dark ground patches, looking for anything that might generate rising air. The third thermal was the strongest. Under a large cumulus cloud over a Belgian town, the thermal was being generated by the town itself. Black roofs and asphalt streets absorbing sunlight, heating air, creating a powerful updraft. Jim circled and gained 2,500 feet in 4 minutes. The variometer showed 400 feet per minute up, as strong as any thermal he'd read about in sailplane magazines. For 40 minutes, Jim thermaled his way across Belgium, finding rising air, climbing, gliding, searching for the next thermal. It was exhausting. More exhausting than combat. Combat was intense but brief. This required constant attention to the slightest changes in vertical speed. Reading the variometer, feeling the aircraft, sensing when the air was lifting versus sinking. Making continuous tiny corrections to stay in the best part of each thermal. At 16:31 he crossed the English Channel, altitude 7,000 feet, 20 miles from RAF Debden. He could see the coast of England. He called the tower. Debden Tower, red leader, emergency, dead stick approach, engine separated, preparing for gear down landing. Red leader, winds 270 at 15 knots, runway 27 cleared. Emergency vehicles standing by. Jim lowered the gear using the emergency hand pump, 30 pumps to get 3 green lights, locked down, no flaps. Flaps required hydraulic pressure from the engine-driven pump, no engine, no flaps. So he'd land fast, about 120 miles per hour instead of the normal 90. He set up for a long straight-in approach. 5 miles out. He had 6,000 feet of altitude, plenty, he could make it. But the damaged engine mount was causing a new problem. The engine was hanging crooked, nose low, creating extra drag, and the center of gravity was shifting forward. The aircraft wanted to pitch down. Jim had to hold steady back pressure on the stick to maintain the glide. 3 miles out, 4,000 feet. Good. On profile. 2 miles out, 2,000 feet. Still good. 1 mile out, 800 feet. He could see the runway, see the fire trucks lined up. This was going to work. Half mile out, 400 feet. He configured for landing, checked gear down and locked. Mixture cut off, mags off, fuel off. Canopy locked open in case he needed to bail out after touchdown. Quarter mile, 200 feet. He was high. Good. Better high than low. He could slip off the excess altitude. Over the threshold, 50 feet. He pulled the stick back, flared. The nose came up. The aircraft settled. Main wheels touched. Smooth. He held the nose up, let the aircraft decelerate. Finally, the nose wheel touched. He had no brakes. The hydraulic system was dead. But the grass beside the runway would slow him. He let the aircraft drift right, onto the grass. The soft ground grabbed the wheels. Deceleration. Hard. He was thrown against the straps. The aircraft slowed, stopped. 3,000 feet down the runway, stopped in the grass. Engine hanging crooked, propeller gone, but intact. Jim was alive. He popped the canopy, climbed out, legs shaking. He knelt on the grass, kissed the ground, then threw up. Adrenaline crash. The crash crew arrived. Medics checked him. Minor cuts from where his head hit the canopy. Otherwise fine. Physically fine. Mentally, he'd remember this flight for the rest of his life. The engineering team examined the aircraft. They found the failed bearing. The improperly balanced propeller hub, still attached to the separated propeller, found in a Belgian field 3 days later. They traced the failure back to Mike Patterson's repair. Mike was devastated. He hadn't known. The manual didn't explain harmonic resonance. He'd done what he thought was right. But he'd nearly killed a pilot. The Army Air Forces updated the maintenance manuals, added a section on propeller balancing and harmonic resonance, made it mandatory to replace damaged propellers, not repair them. Mike's mistake became a lesson that saved lives. Jim Malone flew 17 more missions, survived the war, returned to Texas, became a crop duster, flew for 40 years, died in 1998 at age 80 in his sleep. His family found a piece of metal in his desk drawer, a fragment of the bearing housing from Texas Ranger. He'd kept it as a reminder. That improvisation can save your life, but it can also kill you, and sometimes you're only alive because you got lucky. The P-51D Texas Ranger was scrapped. Too much damage to repair? But the data from the failure led to improvements in propeller maintenance across the entire Air Force. One near disaster that prevented hundreds of future disasters. Now would you trust your life to an engine that was vibrating like it was going to explode? Have you ever had to make a split-second decision where every option was bad and you just picked the least terrible one? Tell me in the comments about the times when improvisation was the difference between life and death, because Jim Malone proved that sometimes survival isn't about following the manual. It's about knowing when to throw the manual away and trust physics, skill, and a whole lot of luck.